All right, welcome into the DuckTerritory Roundtable. Different format, same kind of discussion a little bit. We're trying to adapt to times with COVID-19 going on right now, and one of those is using Zoom. So we're going to use Zoom to do some roundtables. We've got a good show on for this day, and I think this is going to get better. This is going to get hopefully more concrete as we do more and more of these on DuckTerritory.com. So I really appreciate you guys watching this. I'm Matt Prehm. We've also got Erik Skopil and Kevin Wad on from DuckTerritory.com. We're on this show, we're going to discuss the NCAA's decision of granting extra eligibility for spring seniors and their decision to deny winter sports and their seniors an extra year. We'll also go into spring football's cancellation and discuss the impact there on the field and then off the field as well from a recruiting perspective, kind of where Oregon's at right now. And then NFL draft continues to say that they're going to continue to operate as if it's going to happen. And we're going to discuss some things with the NFL and how in the draft and how it plays out for the Oregon Ducks. Now, let's go back to that NCAA discussion, guys. And on Monday, it was announced that the NCAA would grant an extra year of eligibility for seniors and seniors only, and for athletes that played in the spring sports, so softball, track and field, baseball, I guess sand volleyball would be another one. All of those sports that were going on in the spring, if you were a senior, you could get that year back. They denied that decision for winter sports. So, for instance, the Oregon men's basketball program, Peyton Pritchard, Anthony Mathis, Shakur Juiston, their careers are now over. There was some discussion that maybe those types of seniors get their years back because they didn't finish their seasons. Erik, was this the right call to make by the NCAA in your eyes?
I think yes to both, and I say that because it makes a ton of sense for spring sports. I feel really bad, in part because we really didn't get a chance to start covering softball, and they were off to a great start, 22-2 this season, and there are a couple of seniors, I guess primarily Haley Cruz, who now have an opportunity to come back for a second senior season. I think that's deserved. You'd hate for a career to end that way, where you don't even get into conference play. They were actually about to start playing. They had a road series with California that was set for right when everything started getting kind of canceled. They didn't even get a chance to start playing conference play, and you'd hate for their careers to end that way. So I think from a spring sport perspective, it's kind of a no-brainer, and I'm happy that they did it. It would have felt really weird for some of these players to lose that opportunity. From a winter sport perspective, I'd probably also say it's the right call. I think there probably could have been an argument made to give a player like a Sabrina Ionescu or I guess not Satu, but Ruthie Hebard the opportunity to come back for another year, but they had at most 9 games remaining their senior seasons. They'd kind of at least been able to play it out, see how it was going to play out. Obviously you feel awful for the lack of an NCAA tournament for both the men and the women, but I think ultimately this made a ton of sense in terms of, hey, these spring students, they didn't even get a chance to get into conference play, certainly not postseason play. Let's give them another go. In terms of the winter athletes, they had a pretty much opportunity to play their entire seasons. In fact, some of them did play their entire seasons, those programs that weren't making postseason play. So I feel like there was at least kind of a decent ending point for those. Obviously, it's not perfect, but it makes sense to me.
Now, the NCAA did decide to leave this up to the institutions, meaning Oregon will have to choose if they will honor that extra year or not. Kevin, you anticipate Oregon doing that, or do you think there could be a scenario where they wouldn't want to do that?
I think the issue comes into scholarship limits. The only sport that was granted an extra year or extra roster spots was baseball. So you have track and field, softball, those kind of sports that may have already promised scholarships, and those are partial scholarship sports. So there might be more room to work around there, but they've already guaranteed those scholarships to recruits. So maybe if it's like only bringing back some seniors, just kind of figuring that out, I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle. But I think Oregon, being a larger Power 5 school, is in the financial position to where they have the money to take care of that, unlike some of these smaller schools that didn't get their big disbursement. Some schools are saying it's going to cost them $100,000 because of the cancellation of March Madness, right? Even more. So I think Oregon's in a place where they can. It just matters on the individual sports, the individual athletes, who ends up coming back, especially with on the track and field side, the U.S. Olympic trials are going to be held in 2021. So that means that a senior track athlete that could be trying to work towards that has a whole nother year of college season that they can work toward. And for the athletes at Oregon, they get to train in the brand new Hayward Field that's going to have a full year being open because of this to get ready for that U.S. track and field trials. So I think you might see some track athletes stay. Curious what softball does, but baseball has the expanded roster. I think overall it's just going to be watching the individual athletes, and then how does their recruiting impact? I think baseball, one of the reasons they got the bigger roster is that the MLB draft is still up in flux. So we don't know how many guys that had committed to a school aren't going to end up signing in the MLB. I think there's even an impact in football a little bit with Robbie Ashford, but we can talk about that one another time.
Erik, I think this impacts probably the softball program the most. Just where do you feel like this decision could maybe help the development of Missy Lombardi's softball program for Oregon?
Like I said before, they're off to a great start, and unfortunately that got overlooked because we had all of the other sports. We had we had spring football going, and with men's, women's basketball going on. We didn't really get a chance to really devote too much time, I guess, to softball. The good news for softball, it's a relatively young roster. A lot of freshmen and sophomores, a couple of redshirt juniors, and only 2 seniors though. So this is really only impacting Haley Cruz and then a pitcher they just added this offseason, Samaria Diaz, are the only 2 players that would have lost their eligibility to conclude this season anyway. So I think it maybe minimizes it when Kevin's talking about the potential scholarship implications. I'm guessing they're going to be able to work around at retaining Diaz and Cruz. Maybe they'll, and of course the thing is the student athletes also have decided this is what they want to do, and you could see maybe 1 or 2 of them or both of them, I guess, elect to say, hey, I just want to conclude my academic career, my athletic career, and move on to whatever's next professionally. But certainly from a softball perspective, only 2 athletes, both significant players. Diaz was becoming kind of one of their more reliable arms, and obviously Cruz, probably the most notable player on the roster. I'd imagine both of them would like a chance to come back, and I think that would work fairly well. I guess just in terms of it's not a huge number of pieces you have to move around to make it work. Now on to our next segment here. We talked about at the top of the show, and of course everybody listening knows this, spring football has been officially put on hold and canceled. The spring game no longer taking place either. 4 practices they got in. I'm not sure how much you can really take away from it, but it is 4 more practices than some schools got. Oregon did get maybe a little bit of a jump start here. Let's jump over here now. And Matt, I guess offensively, when you look at kind of what was going to take place, or kind of what the expectations for what they could accomplish during spring football, maybe what's the biggest impact of the decision to guess kind of put spring football on the kibosh?
Yeah, this is going to impact, I think, the offense more than the defense, just because you have to replace Justin Herbert. You have to replace 4 starters along the offensive line. And while you got a jump start on it because of Jacob Breland's injury in the middle of the year, your starting tight end is gone. One of your more productive skill guys in receiver, Juwan Johnson, is gone. And, oh, by the way, you're installing a new offense too, because Marcus Arroyo left as offensive coordinator to become head coach at UNLV. And in comes Joe Moorhead, who was the head coach at Mississippi State, and before that was an offensive coordinator at Penn State. And he is now your new offensive coordinator. And so Oregon was involved in installing their offense. And now, since the decision to cancel spring sports, the NCAA and then the Pac-12 has come out and allowed college programs to work 2 hours video remotely with their athletes. And so that will help a little bit. But Oregon was in the middle of installation for their offense. And that's going to impact how summer workouts are held, when there are no coaches out there. And it's going to be difficult to, know 100% definitively what you're working on and what you should be asked to be working on during the off season when coaches are not allowed. So I would look at this as Oregon was 4 out of 15 practices in of installing their offense. They may have gotten the basics installed, but they were still learning the ins and outs of Joel Moorhead's offense, and that's going to be the biggest impact. Is they lost 11 days where one of those was a game in which they got to learn their new offense, which could really put a hindrance on their development during fall camp.
Yeah, I think you also look to just the lack of opportunity to see these quarterbacks work, and that's
Right.
too bad. Tyler Shuck in particular looked sharp when we saw him, but we didn't really get a chance to see him like we would have in a spring game or even the Portland scrimmage setting where he would have been going against that loaded defensive secondary. Sticking on the defense for a second here, Kevin, kind of the same sort of question to you, just about what are some things that you saw that were maybe developed on the defensive side and maybe things that you think this could adversely impact?
I think where it's going to impact is, I mean, you had a pretty much stable. You did replace Dante Williams with Rod Chance at cornerbacks coach. I think that connection might be a little difficult to overcome just in that cornerbacks room. But the defense returns a lot of guys. I think you're just going to have some questions is what is the development of the younger guys on the defensive line? Inside linebackers, Noah Sewell wasn't even at full strength when he enrolled. And then Justin Flo didn't even have the chance to enroll. So there's some questions there. But I think the defensive group just returning so many key guys, especially those 4 seniors, Kayvon Thibodeau, I think is in a much better place than the offense is, especially since they're in year 2 of Avalos' system. But you wonder if they can really take that next step that everyone all the pundits said this offseason had projected for them.
I think selfishly, I'm bummed out we didn't get to see Noah Sewell or Justin Flo really participate in spring practice defensively. That was something I think was probably at the top of all of our list of things we wanted to see. And to not get that, I mean, we saw Noah Sewell stand on the sideline basically for 4 practices and then do a little bit of light jogging, but that was about all we got to see. So I agree. I think that's one of those things that it's too bad. And I do think that's probably the one position defensively, that inside linebacker spot, where there was some potential for players to kind of jockey for position. Obviously some stuff in the secondary as well. I think we did learn some things though. I mean, I think to me, it feels like, I know I said earlier, we didn't get to see Tyler Shuck really go against the competition, but I left practice feeling pretty good that he is Oregon's top quarterback. And obviously there's a lot of time until they hopefully kick off their first game in September. But I look at the way he performed and I thought he was clearly the top guy. Would like to have seen a little bit more, I think, of Jay Butterfield, maybe a little more of Cale Millen, but I left spring kind of feeling like Shuck's your top guy. And then on the offensive line, I feel pretty clear about the right guard, right tackle, left tackle position, but it's that whole center left side of the left guard part that I'm a little bit uncertain with. You got Penny Sewell obviously starting at left tackle. I felt like through 4 practices, we got a pretty good feel that Malasala Amave Laulu and Stephen Jones would be starting at right guard and right tackle. Obviously, that's subject to change too because we're recording this basically in April. But still so much out there, unfortunately, that we kind of have to wait and kind of see how it's going to take place.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that line battle takes place. I think the big loss for football is recruiting. I mean, that last practice that they held on March 12th ended up paying big dividends for the Ducks because they had 4-star quarterback Ty Thompson on campus, and he committed 5 days later after the recruiting shutdown. And Oregon was able to bring a bunch of guys on campus in that 8 days essentially of March. And I think that was pretty important. I mean, Matt, they had the big junior day. How important was that for the Ducks to have?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, they had, I want to say, close to 150 prospects of various classes on campus. Now, when I say 150, you also want to take into account that there's 2021s. Those are guys that are going to be seniors in the fall. 2022s, juniors in the fall. 2023s that were sophomores. And then there were guys that were scholarship players. There were guys that Oregon's evaluating for scholarship players. And then there were guys that Oregon was evaluating to be a walk-on this upcoming season at Oregon. So Oregon was building ties, and they were probably one of only a handful of Power 5 schools to actually get in a junior day event for a recruiting purpose before basically campuses statewide were shut down. And recruiting was then put on a dead period where they couldn't host players even if their school was open. So Oregon was in a unique position where this is going to hurt Oregon because it's hurting everybody, not just Oregon, because coaches can't be out on the road evaluating prospects and whatnot. But they did get one of the few junior day visits in, and they were able to get a lot of prospects on campus. And you mentioned Ty Thompson. While he wasn't part of that junior day event over the weekend, he did show up shortly thereafter, a couple days later, and was going to go visit a couple other schools in the Pac-12 and was going to, make a tour, and ultimately just said, you know what, like, I like Oregon. Oregon was probably the school for me after my visit to Oregon, but I wanted to maybe go see some schools, but I can't. And so I'm just going to commit to Oregon because I'm already kind of comfortable. So I think in a positive manner, that helped Oregon right there. Now, how Oregon goes about evaluating prospects moving forward and getting guys on campus, they're going to have to get really creative, watching lots of film and producing content that can be sent out to recruits.
Yeah, I think that's going to be pretty interesting to see how they remotely do it, but also tying along with that, they lost the spring game. Erik, I mean, spring game has been a huge event. What's your thoughts on that? Losing the spring game, not only for a football perspective, but as a recruiting event.
Yeah, it's huge, and it's an event that both basketball programs used. I'm sure softball and baseball programs utilize. I know women's basketball last year got a couple of commitments following it. And obviously on the football side, it is humongous. I mean, there's only so many events over the course of a calendar year where you can get that number and that caliber of recruits on campus. You think about Oregon does their Saturday Night Live event kind of in June and July usually. That's another one of those. Typically they'll have maybe a weekend here or there when they host a big opponent. When they come to town, they'll do that. And then there's the spring game. And honestly, the spring game has kind of become, I don't want to say that the bigger of those other ones, but it's certainly one of the more beneficial in terms of what they've been able to accomplish during those. I think a couple of years ago, they ended up earning verbal commitments from 5 or 6 prospects. Last year, I know it wasn't quite as much, but typically that's been kind of the way they start their summer momentum is at the spring game by landing a couple of guys or at least improving those connections. So losing that opportunity is certainly significant. Think about last year, Justin Flo was here. The year before that, I think Kayvon Thibodeau was here. It's just, obviously they didn't get commitments right afterwards, but they developed those relationships that pay off down the road. So certainly significant. And I think not just something that hurts the football program, but also potentially impacts recruiting for the women's and men's basketball programs too.
Yeah, that's a great point about the other programs that kind of go overlooked because it is football's day. I think the one thing that I'm noticing right now is all of the evaluation camps, the satellite camps as they used to be known, most places have already canceled those. Those usually run from early June, but then there's also the evaluation period, which kicks off in mid-April, or was supposed to, that went through the end of May. Coaches aren't going to be on the road. They're not going to be able to go evaluate prospects at high schools, go out to high schools, learn about new prospects. It's just an entirely lost period that, as Matt kind of brought up, coaches are going to have to get creative watching film and learning about these prospects. And I'm sure they're hitting the phones really hard, but Oregon has really used that evaluation period to really get to know not only the class that they're currently recruiting for, but down the road. I think Oregon did a good job of that in the January evaluation period, but losing those 6 weeks of being on the road, plus those 10 on-campus satellite camps are just crucial. And I mean, we don't even know how long this is going to last and what the impact might be for a big recruiting event like Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I think there's also the idea that Oregon has implemented a strategy of getting guys on campus multiple times in the spring and the summer and the winter and getting them ready to commit and then take an official visit. And basically that visit is used last, right? It's just before National Signing Day, and basically locks down everyone. And that order and that strategy has been disrupted. Seeing like what Kevin said of how Oregon adapts to that's going to be interesting to watch nonetheless. Let's wrap this up with the NFL draft. They are still content on hosting this year's NFL draft. It's going to be done remotely. NFL franchises, it sounds like, aren't very they're not very happy with this process because the amount of people that they're having involved in the draft is going to be cut significantly. But from an Oregon perspective, players are going to find out where they're going. I think it's safe to say Justin Herbert is going to be the first Duck picked. It would be an utter shock if someone else is picked before Justin Herbert. But what Oregon football player will then go first off the board once Herbert has been selected? Who goes first? Erik, who do you have going first?
This is tough, actually, because Herbert is like a blue chip prospect, top 10, top 5. I think actually we saw a story a couple of days ago where one of the mocks had him going first, but there really doesn't feel like a very clear second guy. I know there seems to be discrepancies in terms of what I've seen. I'm going to go with the prospect I think is most versatile, and I think that's Calvin Throckmorton. He might not have the top-end athleticism required. I think there are maybe questions about whether or not he can play on the outside at tackle, which is where he played primarily in college. But I think what he was able to do in college, where he moved around from guard to center to tackle, I think that's something that's going to be really attractive for scouts looking at him as potentially like a utility guy, where maybe he's not locked in as a starter, but he's your sixth offensive lineman. So when, oh shoot, our left guard goes down for a couple of weeks with an injury, Throckmorton can step in. Oh crap, our right tackle's hurt for a couple of games. Now he can move in. So I think that's going to be an attractive skill set. I do think there are a couple of good other choices, and I'm curious to see what you guys say.
Kevin, who do you have?
I would have said Troy Dye, but he did not work out. He had to pull out of the Senior Bowl, as we found out. He had the torn meniscus at the end of the season, wasn't able to work out at the combine, and couldn't work out at Oregon's Pro Day. So I think I'm going to go with Shane Lemieux right here. Probably going to be late day 2, early day 3, third round, fourth round type of guy. I think that you'll see Troy Dye and Shane Lemieux kind of go really similar, but I think Shane Lemieux he proved a lot at the combine, got his bench reps at Pro Day, and then at Oregon's Pro Day was also working at center, showing that he could do any of the 3 interior spots, which I think kind of ups his value just a little bit more to push him into that third round.
Yeah, a third guy to maybe mention that I don't know if necessarily he's going to be the first duck off the board, but maybe he has improved his stock enough to maybe be in the discussion at least, and that's Juwan Johnson at receiver. He did a really good job at the NFL Combine, ran some good routes, did some good testing. And one thing with him is, does he maybe move to tight end? I know that discussion has been brought up a couple times. So I would probably lean with Calvin Throckmorton, and then my second choice would be what Kevin said of Shane Lemieux. But if you want to bring up a third guy that has a chance to be the first duck off the board, it might end up being Juwan Johnson. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this show. We're going to continue doing these. We'll flush these out. They'll continue to get better. I promise you that. Enjoy this show. And for Erik Skopil and Kevin Wad, I'm Matt Prehm. Thanks for watching the DuckTerritory Roundtable.